Now, once the groundwork is laid in the briefing that this conspiracy exists and who some of the big players are, the next step is to cherry-pick history to find instances where they have tried to take control through cultural or economic influence. As the first step of this, we'd have the prospect watch a short video presentation by a man named David Icke called Problem, Reaction, Solution. I'm not putting that video here because I can just tell it to you much faster. The idea is that the conspirators want a given outcome, like the creation of a surveillance state in Britain or the US. In order to get that, they create a series of horrifying terrorist events. The terrorist attacks are the problem. The reaction is the predictable terror and rage the public feel over these acts. The solution is a surveillance state to protect everyone by spying on every aspect of their behavior 24 hours a day. If someone had just come in and said, "We want to spy on you all the time," no one would willingly have given over their right to privacy. But because of this problem that the conspirators created, everyone is all too willing to sign over their rights, and the conspirators win. Now, there are many problems with this way of thinking. First off, you can use this kind of logic to explain almost anything that goes wrong in the world through hindsight bias. I could use problem, reaction, solution to give you a conspiratorial reason behind almost any government policy or program by connecting some disaster to it. And as for the surveillance state conspiracy, we've all given up our right to a great deal of our privacy without any disaster at all, simply because we agreed to Facebook and Twitter's terms of service agreements. The degree we are under constant surveillance by marketing and advertising firms and the social media platforms we use every day goes far beyond the extent our collective governments are watching us. You know how I know that? Because who does the government have to subpoena when they want to get the goods on someone? Apple, Facebook, Google, Amazon. If we were truly living under the Orwellian society the conspiracy theorists pretend we are, we'd all be in concentration camps by now. We also made very sure that no one saw David Icke's other videos about how the Queen of England and other world leaders are actually blood-drinking lizard people from another dimension. But it was very important in our briefing to not let our prospects think so critically about what we were dosing them with. We would indoctrinate them with Icke's video so that we could then walk them through a history lesson which would conclusively demonstrate that international bankers and the newly minted profession of psychiatry in the late 1800s were responsible for US income tax, the eugenics movement in the early 1900s, the refinement of the American educational system in the 1920s, and the rise of Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, which Scientology believes was caused by psychiatry and not Adolf Hitler. Then we would come forward through false flag operations like the Gulf of Tonkin incident and show how 9/11 was an inside job. It was usually at this point in the briefing where we would take a break and have the person being recruited watch videos such as Zeitgeist, Loose Change, and Endgame. If you've never heard of these before, consider yourself lucky for having dodged a bullet. Zeitgeist is an unapologetically horrible propaganda piece created and narrated by Peter Joseph, which is broken down into 3 parts. 1, how Christian religion is a total lie based on earlier religious works. 2, how 9/11 was an inside job perpetrated by the United States government to implement Homeland Security and the surveillance state. And 3, the Federal Reserve System's inherent corruption and how global bankers manipulate world events for their own avarice and greed. While Joseph claims that this was never intended to be a documentary and instead was performance art, it has received tens of millions of views, been shared across social media platforms for years, and is a work of gospel for many conspiracy theorists. Despite numerous religious, economic, and civics experts, as well as media writers debunking almost every part of this film for its shall we say, creative facts? The Zeitgeist movie actually spawned its own movement of followers, which continues to this day. Loose Change is another of these nonsensical documentaries which plays fast and free with anything resembling facts, and is heavily steeped in suggestion, innuendo, and coincidence to make the case that 9/11 was a false flag operation executed by the United States government. Even though there are gross and glaring inaccuracies throughout this so-called documentary, film marketer Corey Rowe has gone on record saying, "We don't ever come out and say that everything we say is 100%. We know there are errors in the documentary, and we've actually left them in there so that people discredit us and do the research for themselves." A year later, a third edition of this movie came out, greatly expanded with Alex Jones on board as an executive producer, and yet another cut was made in 2009 and again in 2015. Like Zeitgeist, Loose Change has been debunked by experts across numerous professional fields who have pointed out its use of out-of-context quotes, shoddy research, creative facts, and out-of-date sources. Then there is Endgame, Blueprint for Global Enslavement, a 2007 documentary written and directed by Alex Jones. Now, if you want to see some of the most sensationalistic and insane ramblings of the conspiracy mindset, skip Zeitgeist and Loose Change and go straight to this one. The description of this film on Wikipedia is too good to not quote. In the film, director Jones reveals an alleged eugenics-obsessed group of global elite whose mission is the elimination of most of the Earth's population and the enslavement of the rest. He makes claims of a satanic international network steering planetary affairs for hundreds of years. He discusses his claim about the pseudoscientific eugenics being used by governments, Microsoft, and the band U2. You just can't make this stuff up, but Alex Jones sure can, and he gets paid a good amount of money to do it. And yes, I'm not implying anything. I'm stating outright that I think Alex Jones is in the market of fear-mongering and paranoia because it pays good money for him to peddle lies and fake news for his own personal aggrandizement. I also think it's despicable. I don't think making money is wrong, but I do think that creating fear with messages of a coming apocalypse and then selling people gold, water filters, survival gear, as well as more books and more DVDs selling more fear, is a pretty disgusting way to make a living. Apparently, he's worth at least $5 million, so that's a pretty good living he's making by scaring the hell out of people who can't seem to understand that he's taking advantage of them in the same way any destructive cult leader does. The methods Jones uses are the same. Now, we used to have prospective recruits watch these videos, which take something like 5 to 6 hours, precisely so they would induce fear and paranoia. We knew what we were doing, even if we ourselves happened to believe most of this nonsense too. This was done in order to provide a historical framework which showed that the plans of the global elites go back centuries. That from family member to family member, the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and the Morgans and the De Beers have been working tirelessly to suppress the lower classes for only one reason: to create a slave society in which they are the masters and we are merely chattel for them to use and abuse. We would then show how international organizations, such as the United Nations, are actually front groups for these bankers to enforce their will, how they secretly meet each year under the guise of the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, the G6 Summit, and the Group of Eight. Despite the idea that these are clandestine meetings where secret plans are hatched, these meetings are actually now so hidden in plain sight that they have websites announcing when they're happening. It's funny in looking back at this because the one thing no one ever asked us when we were doing this briefing is, if these conspiracies are so far-reaching and have remained secret for so long, how do you guys know all about it? It's actually one of the key questions that no conspiracy theorist can logically answer. In order to actually work, all these nefarious plots and schemes would have to be kept secret. If everyone knows about them, they don't work so good.